again, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Tillett, President of the City Club. Welcome to today's City Club Forum on the current and future status of our region. Our speaker today is Mike Burton, Executive Officer at Metro, who will review some of the things accomplished during his tenure and what he sees the future of the region. But first, some announcements. Join us next Friday, April the 12th, for a program focusing on the health of our central city, featuring Don Mazziotti, who is Executive Director of the Portland Development Commission, and Kim Kimbrough, Executive Director of the Association for Portland Progress. And that will be here at the MAC. The City Club's Growth Management and Environment Committee has decided to make a return trip to Vancouver, BC, for the purpose of learning more about how Vancouver deals with growth issues. Planning Director Larry Beasley and City Councillor Gordon Price, both of whom have spoken here at City Club at Friday Forums, have agreed to meet with the group. The trip will take place over the weekend of June the 1st, and you can find detailed information on the flyers on your table or by asking City Club staff. So if you'd like to be part of that, speak to staff. A reminder of the trove of information available to you on the City Club website at www.pdxcityclub.org is a fabulous resource, and I'd encourage you to take advantage of it. I'd also remind you that you can obtain a video or audio tape of this or any other City Club program through the club office. Video tapes are $20 and audio tapes are $10. Call Suzanne at the club office for more information. Our board host today, seated at the far end of the table, is Ginny Cooper, Treasurer of the Club and Director of the Multnomah County Libraries. Ginny will have the privilege of asking the first question of Mike Burton, and following her question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please be ready at the microphone with your question, identify yourself as a member, and ask your question, as always, in 30 seconds or less. I could say or else, but or less. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Portland General Electric, from CH2M Hill, and from Providence Health Systems, and we're most grateful for their support. Mike Burton has been closely involved with land use planning since he went to work for Governor Bob Straub in the 70s. He began to learn the political realities about land use regulation as he liaised with the counties on implementation of Senate Bill 100. Undeterred, he went on to become the first presiding officer of the Metro Council when it was formed in 1979, the era in which the urban growth boundary was first established or being felt in this region. In 1985, Mr. Burton was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives for the first of 5 terms. Much of this time was spent on Revenue Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, but he never quite escaped from land use issues. In 1995, he was elected to be Metro's executive officer and was re-elected to that position in 1999 with the confidence that if anyone could hold the line on expansion of the urban growth boundary, it was Mike Burton. The position of executive officer will disappear with the reorganization of Metro, so this is a perfect time for Mike to give us a retrospective and perhaps a glimpse into the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Metro's executive officer, Mike Burton.
Thank you, Patty, and it is a pleasure to be here. This is actually, I believe, my 10th speech to the City Club, and I do look forward to 10 more. You may not, but I do, and not in this capacity. I want to just take a minute at the beginning to do something because I've been at this for a number of years, and what I've managed to accomplish, if anything, in the last 8 years is certainly not something I've done by myself, but with a lot of very good help, and some of those folks are here, and some of them folks like Andy Sloop, who, by the way, that was an excellent report that you all did, who used to work over there, helped me keep straight on things, and I just want to recognize some people who have really been significant in helping me accomplish some of the things that I do. First, Nancy Goss-Duran, who is my chief assistant, executive assistant, gives me my schedules, make sure I'm there on time, and Nancy, I want to thank you for all you do. Pete Sandrock, who's my chief operating officer, who retired from as Benton County district attorney and now helps me keep things straight up where we're at. B.J. Jones, who walks me and talks me around the region. Karen Blauer and Karen Withrow, who do outreach programs for us, Mark Zoltan, who helped me with his speech, just recently joined my staff, and Ken Helm, who does my fish stuff. We call him the fish guy. I also want to make sure we recognize Rod Park, who's here as a member of the Metro Council, Lisa Nato, who is over here suffering from the same thing I am, a bad back, but she was a former Metro Councilor, now is a Multnomah County Commissioner, and Charlotte Lehan, who is here, who's mayor of Wilsonville, and I appreciate you folks being here. Also, some of my department directors, folks like Dan Cooper, who's my legal counsel, keeps me out of trouble, Andy Catugno, who does double duty in both transportation and land use planning and has done a heroic effort over the years, Jennifer Sims, who's been probably there longer than any of us and keeps me financially in good stead, and Terry Peterson, who helps reduce our solid waste problems and increase our recycling. Charlie Seco runs our parks program, and others who are here, Mark Williams, who runs the Merck and the Convention Center and our expo facilities, and Tony Vecchio, who runs the zoo for us. So those folks and the staff that are here with them, I really appreciate what you have done. And particularly, let me thank my wife, Terry. I just got married in January, and she's been a whole new perspective on things with her 3 adult children. I've got a whole new lease on life and a new way of looking at things, and she's been delightful, and thank you. This is, for me, I guess, rather a sad occasion, and it's not sad because it's my last. As I mentioned, my 10th. If you give us many, you don't get sad about that. But it is the last one I'll make before you as executive officer. I'm not sad because I'm leaving the job. In reality, I've got another 9 months to go, and in that period of time, there's going to be an incredible amount of work to do, including decisions on where the urban growth boundary will go. That's a factor that Rod Park and the council will face. We need to establish protection standards for our natural resources, and that's been a tough road, and we will be making those decisions hopefully this year. And anyway, I suppose since I eliminated my job in the last election, I shouldn't feel bad about being up here for the last time. So there's plenty to do, and during the last 8 years, I feel a great deal of pride in what I've managed to do, along with all the folks who have helped me do that. We have stayed true to the urban form. We've protected precious natural resources. We've provided essential regional services, expanding the convention center, the zoo, and expo center to help boost our regional economy. I'm proud that we have managed, I've been part of the management, to purchase over 7,000 acres of open spaces to hold in public trust for centuries to come. I've seen the region's recycling rate climb, while at the same time the solid waste fees have dropped to the lowest in the United States, western United States. I've seen in these 8 years the region expand its transit services to complete 2 light rail lines and begin a 3rd to North Portland. We also have the exciting possibility now of commuter rail in Washington County. And folks, I want to tell you, it is working. During the decade of the 90s, TriMet ridership has grown 49%, faster than our population or those dreaded vehicle miles traveled. More than 300,000 people a day ride transit in the Portland region. Few places I know of can boast such success in their fight to bring better balance to the transportation systems. And by the way, contrary to the belief of many, Metro has managed the allocation and expenditure of over $1 billion on roads since I took office. It's a balanced system. I even saw the overview of the implementation of a new, sophisticated, multi-million-dollar software system on time, on budget, without any headlines. And that's one I go on. Those are just a few of the reasons that I predicted in my first City Club speech that after assuming this office that I had the best political job and I had it at the best of times. It's true. But these, unfortunately, are not the best of times. And that's why I feel sad. Not just for the region, not just for me, but for our beloved Oregon. I feel we're standing on the edge of a precipice in which we could easily find ourselves sliding into an abyss. As an outgoing elected official, I suppose I enjoy a rare luxury. I can speak my mind bluntly and directly on things that matter. In truth, I think all of you know, or many of you know certainly, that I have never been one to shy away from being direct. So I stand before you today convinced that we are on the verge of losing the special qualities of this place called Oregon. We are fast losing hope that things are indeed not only different here, but thanks to its citizens and its leaders, we were always capable of being better. An Oregon without hope would no longer be a special place, the place where a promising frontier beckoned settlers such as my great-great-great-uncle back in the 1860s. It would no longer be the home of progressive, activist politics that produced the Bottle Bill, Beach Protection, and Senate Bill 100. An Oregon without hope would unfortunately be much like everywhere else. And you should be worried by that. If you ask yourself this question, where else in the United States would you want to live? And you give the answer that most Oregonians would give, no other place, then where do we turn next? Where do our children and grandchildren go to pursue their dreams? So what's happened to our beloved state? Some would argue that it's those outsiders arriving that change the place. Others would cite the inevitability that good places get bigger and then decline. And others might blame our political leaders. Well, I'm sorry to say that some of us in this room, to some extent, must share the blame. For all we are letting it slip away. We've let our values be marginalized. We've cowered before political demagogues such as Bill Sizemore, Mark Hemstreet, and Larry George, and their alluring siren song of their many ballot measures. We have merely turned the dial when talk show hosts like Lars Larson preached intolerance and cynicism. Let's face it, we've all chosen to play defense. We've played it safe. We haven't demanded courageous, progressive, or activist leaders and backed them at the ballot box. We haven't demanded positive ideas to counter the tides of negativity. And while we have at times played nimble defense, we have lost ground. Many of you in this room have worked hard and generously contributed to successful fights against the demagogues, but we've lost some of those fights. Ballot Measure 5, Measure 47, Measure 7. We have watched the quality of our public schools decline year after year. Our local school boards cut school days, increase size classes, and eviscerate arts and music programs. Does anyone remember the promise that our public schools would not be harmed by the passage of Measure 5? We have seen Oregon's hungry and poor increase to some of the highest levels in the nation. We have watched our school-age and college-age populations explode at the very time the education funds are scarce or threatened. We see qualified teachers leave the state to seek work elsewhere. We have watched our tax system turned on its head. Oregonians now pay the second highest income taxes in the United States, but we rank 50th in taxes on consumption. Our property taxes and overall tax burden has dropped during the past decade as 500,000 new residents streamed in across the borders demanding better roads, more social services, and health care. We are playing a dangerous game, and we're bound to lose it. Our state's budget almost entirely dependent on economic growth for its revenue. Income taxes, including large amounts levied on capital gains from the booming stock markets of the 90s, now comprise more than 85% of our general fund and 70% of our total tax collected. Lottery proceeds and one-time federal largesse make up much of the rest. That means the very growth that we fear, the growth that endangers our quality of life, our transportation system, and our clean air and water, is our only sustenance in a post-Measure 5 and 50 world. It is the ethos of a cancer cell, growth for growth's sake. We all decry the decline of our public schools, our library systems, but their future is firmly hitched to our state budgets. 70% of our local school funding comes from the state now. Our state budget teeters precariously on the wave of good times. When the bad times come, things will get worse, and we will not have any way to stop it. We've already spent nearly $500 million on new prisons, construction since 1995, and the 4 additional facilities planned for later this decade will cost us at least another $325 million. And now we can see the final assault on our Oregon values. It's Oregonians in action, a front group for landowners, speculators, and developers intent on dismantling the state land use system and laws that have managed to preserve our quality of life despite booming population growth and a declining tax burden. There are, and on this list, dozens of ballot measures that Oregonians in Action, Bill Sizemore, are proposing with the intent of gutting the laws that have protected our environmental quality for the last 25 years. Oregonians in Action would lead us to believe this is a simple matter that they're proposing, that the choice we have is to make in the urban areas simply between density or no density. But our region's objectives are far more complex, and you know that from the report you just got through going through on ballot measure 7. This is no simple matter. This is a very complex issue. What Oregonians in Action are proposing is a simple answer to that, and yet our objectives are based in state law and federal law, and most importantly, they're based on common sense. Our objectives include these things: protection of farm and forest land, protection of clean water and air, protection of natural habitat for wildlife, protection of existing single-family neighborhoods, protection of open spaces. At the same time, our objectives call for an efficient transportation system that reduces single-occupancy vehicle use and reduces air pollution and maintains a healthy economy that ensures equity within and between communities of the region. Not a simple thing to carry out. So what are we supposed to do? We can throw away certain objectives just so the others are met. Do we want to take anything off that list? Think about whether you want to do that. Or should we try to achieve the goals of a carefully reasoned, publicly debated plan, such as 2040, that has served the region so well in these years? The OIA trivializes these complex issues with a seductively titled ballot measure, the Neighborhood Preservation Act, or Measure 2611. This would paralyze the Metro Council's ability to manage growth or to even consider moving the urban growth boundary if that's necessary. Measure 2611 is flawed. It'll probably be illegal. It'll go to the courts. We'll be sitting around doing that sort of thing again. But if it passes, we will end up in a court fight. Meanwhile, guess what? People will still be moving here. Babies will still be born. Traffic congestion will still increase. And we at Metro and you at home will be powerless to manage in any way whatsoever to do anything about it. What's their real agenda? Well, I think it's a sneaky attempt by Oregonians in Action to not only turn our farmland into sprawling subdivisions, but just as importantly, to show their right-wing backers that they can win right here in the Portland region. If you don't believe me, then listen to what Larry George had to say at the OIA's recent annual meeting. Quote, "If we can politically win inside or just the metro area, I am telling you it is not long before we will have major land use reform in the state of Oregon," unquote. That's what they're really after in all of this. So let's start our fight right now on Oregon's land use laws by voting no on Measure 2611 in May. In the bigger scene, we once again face the same choice. Do we fight a rearguard action hoping to delay or minimize the damage? Or do we face the hard truth that it has always cost money and taken the courage to protect things which we hold dearest? It's not an easy thing to do. Are we going to stand up to the tyranny of the minority and demand strong, progressive political leaders who not only defend our values, but also march forward with plans to keep Oregon a special place for the next century? A leader who does that will indeed be in political peril. He or she will be swimming upstream against a growing tide of populism and cynicism. But in the end, if the citizens not only demand but also support a courageous stand, then we will triumph. If not, we will continue what the president of the Washington Research Council has termed civic death spiral. It occurs when special interests figure out that it is easier to buy initiatives than state legislators. It appeals to the longtime populist tradition that we hold so dear here in the West. It results in the passage of ballot measures that sharply cut taxes, place spending limits on state government, including a required supermajority of legislators to pass new revenue measures, and then imposes term limits on those same legislators. It happened in California 15 years ago, and it's beginning to happen here in Oregon today. It's hyper-democracy gone amok, and it results in the destruction of coherence, of courage, and of the vision that characterized Oregon's leaders from Oswald West to Tom McCall. It sounds simple and good, you know. Let the people rule over themselves in the state. But folks, we have been selfish. We want lower taxes, but we want better services. We want better roads and light rail, but lower gas taxes. We want our cake, and we're eating it too. Oregonians received more than $1 billion back in kicker payments in the last decade. Oregon corporations pocketed another $320 million in that same period. $1.3 billion. That's a lot of textbooks, it's a lot of patched potholes, and it's a lot of health care. So what are we going to do? It's easy to stand up here, I suppose, and complain and point fingers, but let me start the frank discussion that we need to have in this state. First, as I've said, we need to turn back the attack on our property tax, on the property tax demagogues that have launched against our state and local land use laws. We need to start right here again voting against ballot measure 2611. I concur with the City Club report, as I said here in my speech last year, that there are cases in a defined sense where legitimate compensation should be made. But in the meantime, we need to prepare to beat back ballot measure 7, as your report said, in any of its bastard children or grandchildren that comes to us. Our state land use laws are the reasons why we have clean air and a view of the Cascades. They contain our best hope for maintaining clean water supplies for drinking and recreation. They're our only hope to protect protective farmland. It is our land use laws that will help us make sense out of our urban areas. But we must be reasonable enough to recognize that land use laws written a quarter of a century ago must adapt to the 21st century. That means Metro's leaders must be given the flexibility to bring some marginal lands into the urban growth boundary so we can have homes near jobs and reduce the impact on transportation systems and clean air. Secondly, we have to fix our tax system. It's grossly out of whack. Oregon ranks 41st in a nation in our tax burden per person. We are not suffocating from high taxes. State and local taxes as a percentage of personal income fell during the 1990s in Oregon. If we don't tackle that issue, we will end up with both a low quality of life and, according to studies, continued population growth as people head for the states with the lowest tax burdens. When one thinks about low-tax states, states like Mississippi, is that where you want to be? State spending on K-12 education is up 291% in the last decade, and still our schools are declining. It's too risky to stake our children's future solely on income taxes from a booming economy and a soaring stock market or receipts from video poker machines and Uncle Sam. If we want to keep property taxes low, when they're going to have to tax our consumption. Once again, we rank dead last in a nation in that category. While in Washington, sales tax accounts for 60% of tax collections, in California 31%, Idaho 32%, nationwide 33%. For example, a 1% value-added tax on goods and services would yield an estimated $843 million a biennium. And isn't it interesting that that number matches the shortfall in the current biennium? We need to raise corporate taxes. Oregon corporations benefited handily from Measure 5 and Measure 50. They enjoyed huge profits in the 1990s. They continue to benefit from our high quality of life that helps attract skilled workers. I know that with tough economic times, it's considered anathema to suggest increasing business costs. But if Oregon's corporations want a highly skilled, highly educated workforce and a transportation system that works for them, then they ought to pay their fair share. A 1% increase in the corporate tax rate would yield $126 million a biennium. Oregon remains the cheapest state in the union to drive a car. If we want our road problems solved with somehow with the equivalent of a immaculate paving event, then I think we've been sniffing too much gas fumes. To fund both road improvements and public transit, we need to raise the cost of driving. This means vehicle excise taxes. On a new car in California, you pay up to $1,000. In Oregon, $30. Why does it only cost $30 here? Is it any wonder that our roads and bridges are collapsing while we are hard-pressed to find local funds for more transit services? Third, we need to get real about the fact that there are 400,000 poor Oregonians, most of them working hard, and many of them single mothers with children. We need to get serious about affordable housing and how the lack thereof makes the poor even poorer. A 1% state real estate transfer tax would yield close to $500 million for housing programs. Fourth, we need to raise taxes on beer, wine, and cigarettes. But we must recognize that the so-called sin taxes will never come close to resolving our budget crisis. Fifth, we must set aside and then invest some of our lottery proceeds for our future. Economic cycles come and go. We kick back billions to taxpayers in good times, but we have no safety net when times get tough. If we want to protect both taxpayers and services, we need a rainy day fund of a substantial size. The net revenues from the lottery in the last decade, their net revenues, were $2.26 billion. B as in billion. Let's take 10% off the top and invest it in that fund. How much help that might have been to the legislature in this last session, or several special sessions. 6, we must curb the abuse of the initiative system. People are indeed buying ballot measures by paying Mr. Sizemore and his signature gatherers. We should increase the number of signatures required and crack down on fraud. Better yet, we should refrain from signing these petitions and give our leaders a chance to lead. And to that end, we really need to encourage and support a new class of courageous and progressive political leaders. We must reward their foresight, not punish them with term limits and spending limits. We need to use our ballot box to limit terms of those we don't support, and not as an initiative factory churning out populist and damaging mandates to legislators. The great state of Oregon didn't emerge from a combination of dumb luck, rampant populism, and low taxes. Oregon is the product of a progressive leadership and an educated and engaged citizenry, and that's what we need to expect of people who are citizens in this state. Well, I can imagine by now you're saying, well, Burton's gone nuts, and he's only saying this because he's leaving office. But these aren't new ideas. They're just hard to get past. I can tell you I know that because every single one of those are measures or actions that I have actually put out at some time during the 20-some years I've been in office. We all need now to engage in this debate and push these issues to the top of the public's agenda. In fact, it's even more critical that I and others speak out now. We're inching closer to the edge and risk slipping over it to become just another marginal place. All of us in this room have worked too hard to let that happen to us. I hope that if I can leave any legacy of my public service, it would be to give courage to those leaders who will follow me. I would tell them, when you take on the weight of public office, don't play at the margins. Step into the center of the arena fully aware that you are in for a fight. You've got to be armed with your convictions and prepared to lead despite whispered warnings in the polls and the pundits. And finally, let me just say, I know of no great place on the earth that was born on the cheap. Not Paris, not New York, not Vancouver, British Columbia. If we want to keep Oregon and Portland a great place, a special place that attracted our forefathers and our current neighbors, then we must be willing to pay a reasonable price for that quality of life. We must be willing to support political leaders who tell us the honest truth. They do not try to tell us that we can have it all without paying for it. We must face this reality. We'll lose our greatness, we'll lose our hope, and worse yet, we'll squander one of the most precious legacies we could ever pass on to our future generations, this great place. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we all join in the pleasure of hearing from somebody who speaks his mind so clearly. You've given us more to be nervous about than to be pleased about. I wonder if you might identify 2 or 3 things that you see that give you hope so that we might join you in helping to make sure that those good efforts move forward.
So I got to lift the wet blanket. Is that the idea? Well, let me say I think there is a great deal for us to be proud of. And I look around this room and I look at people who are here, and I know things that you have all done and projects that you've presented, and it is true. When you, 2 days ago, the mayor of Portland announced that Vestas was coming here, a Dutch company, to headquarter their manufacturing facility in Rivergate that'll bring in good family wage jobs. It's not just the family wage jobs that's interesting about why they were attracted here, but the fact is that they chose to do that in Portland. And part of the reason for that is because of the place that we are. It's attractive. I talked to the mayor and some of the folks. I said, how did you entice this company to come here? And they said, well, we didn't have the money to compete like a lot of other cities did. It wasn't that we offered tax breaks. It wasn't that they laid out and were able to do something that would financially gain this company. It simply was the place. Those folks came here and looked at it. And the day before that, we were out on the Interstate Avenue, and we were dedicating the 50% mark on the North Light Rail. And actually, then the day after that, we were celebrating the 50th percent on the convention center. Actually, that's a little scary to think about it, because we've gotten so desperate to celebrate things, we've gotten to it when they're halfway through it. So, but it is. I mean, we are finishing the light rail construction. We did have a thing. The Lodging Association, the auto rental folks, volunteered to increase their own taxes to help pay for the expansion of the convention center, and that'll bring lots of jobs. Or we have the kinds of companies that are bringing in those measures. Those things are very positive, and we'll keep going, and we'll attract them, and they'll happen because it's related to the quality of life. I will see people supporting the library measure that comes up in May. And by the way, there's an election in May. This is one of the most subliminal elections I've been concerned about. There's an election coming up in May, and I hope you'll all get out. One of the measures is the library measure, and I hope Oregonians will support that. But let's look at it. In order to pass, that measure has to have 50% of the people voting. And I think we're going to be hard-pressed getting 50% of the voters out. And that's the problem. We've taken away our right, and we're really bowing again, I think, to the tyranny of the minority. I would also want to point out that the voters here did pass, and I was able to be in the lead on that, the open spaces measure. We have put those properties away for this long period of time, and I think generally what I've seen amongst Oregonians is there is still people who are engaged in paying attention who support the quality of life in this place, and so I still feel good about that. I'm just worried about our ability to pay for it, and I'm worried about these assaults and the rest of the people who are in this room who will be lured by those ballot measures by not understanding what they are. Remember, you're not with the newspaper anymore. You're retired.
My very first question as a City Club member. I'm Larry Hildebrand. Mike, your talk was tremendous. I mean, the clear thinking, bold ideas. But one of the things that's been on your mind, I'm sure, over the last 20 years has been Metro itself and how to finance Metro activities, some way other than taxing its own services. What do you think should be done to finance our regional government?
Thanks, Larry. I actually have, on several occasions and at this club several years ago, recommended and urged and have laid out resolutions to the council to go for a general levy. As you know, today, because of the tax restrictions, jurisdictions can no longer establish a tax base. So what you have to do is 5-year operating levies, and I think we should put together an operating levy that looks at and talks to the public about the services that are provided by planning and connecting to the way in which we protect clean air and clean water. So I think a 5-year operating levy would be my choice. That would be a general operating levy for 5 years to do those things. Otherwise, you are literally, because of our tax system in this state, cornered into doing specific niche taxes and this sort of thing. And I think that's the other problem, is that we see governments that are trying to provide services going out desperately trying to attach things to make them, just to keep them going. We've done that in this state. Quite frankly, I wish we could go back to the tax-based system and be required to renew those every 5 years instead of doing levies every 5 years, just a tax base. It I suppose, would amount to the same thing, but what I would like to see Metro do is establish a 5-year levy for its non-enterprise activities. As you know, the zoo has a tax base that was established long ago, and it funds itself really through that and gate receipts and then some grants that we get. Our convention center and our other facilities get a hotel lodging tax percentage that helps with the capital and operating, and so they're reasonably enterprise driven. They have a revenue source. What doesn't have it is planning, which is our key element. That's what we're required to do with the charter. That, I think, needs to go to a general operating levy. The hard thing, of course, is getting the public to understand, put in a couple pennies for planning. But if you look at what we've done in this region to help us get through these issues and to make some sense out of this region, which is why probably just about every day I meet with or respond to some visitors who come in and say, how do you guys do this, and what are you doing there? We're the most emulated region in the world, I guess, because of our planning. And I think we have to go out to the public and say, this is valuable to you, there's a service you get, and let's have a couple of pennies for that on a general levy. They have to do it every 5 years, but that would be my solution.
Whitney Bates, City Club member. First of all, Mike, you should understand you're only getting a brief sabbatical from public service, and then you have to be back.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I understand the Democrats are looking for a good political presidential candidate, so maybe.
Okay. I have a number of concerns, and I want you to express some kind of quick response to a couple of crazy ideas I have. One is, since the legislature will not even take a vote on the income surtax, what about those of us who are fortunate enough to be affluent to make what I call the self-directed income surtax payment to the state of Oregon this year?
Well, that's what they did back in, what was it, 84, I guess. Governor Atiyeh brought the legislature back, did that as a stopgap. I don't have any problem with that. Okay. I think that should happen. Let me just explain something, though, what I said. We are the second highest income tax rate in the states, and we have nothing down here. What I'm suggesting is if we had a second or a third leg in a general tax, we could bring the income tax rate down, raise the other, and actually, I think, raise additional dollars in the process. But
my suggestion is that as a short-time measure, you and I were fortunate enough to have considerably more than we need. Just volunteer when we send in our taxes to pay 10% more than we owe. Self-directed income tax. But I have a more concrete suggestion, and that is that we'll have the absurdity of a state kicker law, which says that if the state collects 1.999, as long as you can breathe, % over the anticipated revenue, they keep it. If they get 2%, they give it all back. That at least has to be changed to say the state keeps that first 1.99% and the rest goes back, and that 1.99% adds to a reserve fund.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the absurdity of that, as I mentioned, we have in the last decade sent $1.3 billion back at times when we had unprecedented growth, and it doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner.
John Leeper, City Club member. Morning, Mike.
Morning.
In that I've got 30 seconds, and I'll take Patty at his word. I'll cut to the chase and eliminate a lot of the preamble. What is your position on Metro going to the state and requesting a 6-month extension for the submission of the expansion of the UGB requirements to give some better assurance that sub-regional analysis is given a good hard look in that effort?
Thank you. For those of you who don't know it, John Leeper is also Washington County Commissioner. And there is a debate going on. It's a little complex. And again, not one of these things that requires a quick response. Actually, we've been working on this, and we've had one extension already, or actually we're on an extension for this whole thing. The debate is sub-regional analysis, which means that you look at an area to decide whether it needs housing and employment in a sub-region versus the entire region. Depending on where you live in the region, if you're in the city of Portland, you don't want, in fact, sub-regional analysis. If you're in Washington County where they have the needs, then you want it done on that. Actually, we've asked the state to give us clarification about how we can do that. Unfortunately, at the impact meeting, John, there wasn't anybody there from Washington County, but that actually went down to make that request to tell us whether or not we can do that. Asking for an extension of that will depend, I think, on how the state responds to us. And we're looking to that. I think, as far as I'm concerned, that sub-regional analysis should be done. I think that's a legitimate way to look at the issue, and I think the council feels the same way. And I think Rod Park would probably, in detail, answer your question. But I certainly think we need to move on. Let's see how the state responds to whether or not we have that authority.
My big concern, Mike, is when is the state going to respond, and will they respond in a timely enough manner to enable that December 31 deadline to
his question, for those of you who didn't hear it, is, well, will the state respond in time for us to do that? And I've been around when I said that this land use system needs to catch up with the 21st century, part of it is the ability, it's very complex issues for the state to respond to these things. I think I have to respect the depth with which they go into that, but I'm going to push real hard to try to get that answer because it's a key question for half the state's population, and we'll try to get it done, and I hope they will.
Kirsten Green, City Club member. Again, could you tell us, please, about another ballot measure that we'll be voting on in May, ballot measure 2629, and what the implications of that might be for the urban growth boundary?
Yes, there are two ballot measures that, one of them, 2611, I've described that. That's put on by the Oregonians in Action. The Metro Council, when it looked at that and saw the flaws in it, it's one of these things that there's a lot of interpretive language in it. There were some parts of it there that we said, gee, we're doing this anyway, and it's also a good thing. That is giving notice, having public meetings. We do that, but if we want to go ahead and write it in the charter, if that seems to be a choice that people have, let's put a measure out. So the Metro Council put a ballot measure out, 2611, which is a counter to 2611. You have a choice. The other way around?
You called it 2611.
2629 is the Metro. The 2629, yes. 2611, no. How about that? We're just good measure. Or vote no on both of them, and you're still okay. But just make sure you vote no on 2611. That's the main thing. It is a countermeasure. It actually, I think what 2629 does, which is the Metro measure, is puts into the charter some things that we're already doing. I don't have any problem with that, but it's like a constitution. Every time you keep putting stuff on there, it just gets more interpretive, and it's unfortunate. But the council felt, as public policymakers, that they had a responsibility to let the public know that this is what you really ought to be doing, and not the other one, and that's why the measure's out. Mr. Polani, yes, you're right. We should have subways.
Yes, we should have subways. Yes, we should have subways because Max is absolutely too full and too slow.
Yes.
But how to pay for it? Well, Americans drive more and more, bigger and bigger. They consume unbelievable, and yet the gas taxes are the lowest, and they are used to beef up the problem. I think we should ask the people to pay and pay and pay and use the money for everything that we need, together with everything else. Why should roads and highways be preferred over prisons, over corrections, over education, over everything else? Why?
Well, Ray, it's probably not everybody as saintly as you are, but I appreciate what you're saying. That's true.
Marcus Samantel, City Club member. I have lots of questions, but clarification on one of the earlier questions. 2611, 2629 will be debated at the Growth Management Committee meeting. Check your upcoming bulletins. Larry George will be there, and Charlotte, where are you? I understand you're signed up.
Charlotte
also
Lehan
be
is the mayor of Wilsonville, and I think
Right.
you'll find that without any exception, all the mayors, the 24 mayors in the region, are opposed to 2611.
So there's a good opportunity to get more information. Also, a question, Mike, I farmed in the North Plains area,
Yes.
Washington County. Much of what Metro does and did affects those areas. And yet, I had no vote because the Metro boundary is, we were outside of the Metro jurisdiction. How can that be changed? Should it be changed? When will it be changed?
Well, the immediate response is we'll just simply make the boundaries contiguous with the state boundaries. I'm not really looking for that. It's a very good point you make, and it's one of the concerns I have, because in state law and also our own adopted charter, it says that Metro has a responsibility for protection of natural resources areas just outside of the boundary, and yet we do affect that. What you have is a line that's a taxing district, and I'm sure that people would say here, say Burton's just asking for all those new taxing areas. We would be able to spread out some of our taxes a little thinner, but we don't have very many, and that's the zoo primarily. I think the answer to that might be to work it in state law. I have long wondered why it is that the metropolitan area is responsible for maintaining the viability of the rural area. I think we should be focusing on the urban area, and it's the counties and the cities that should, the counties and the state that should have the responsibility for maintaining the viability of farmland and those natural resource areas. And quite frankly, they don't have the wherewithal, nor do they have the support of some legislators to do that. There really isn't a policy, there is a policy in the state that says you protect natural resource areas, but I'm not certain it's enforced well. And so being able to give some connectivity to the way that you'd have a voice in that, I think is something that should be found where there would be a requirement for us to have at least an ongoing dialogue that lets you come into the impact table, representatives around there that are impacted by that. And that's a good point. But I think it's best addressed by making sure the counties who have these rural areas are actually addressing the support of that. And you may want to have that discussion with Commissioner John back there about that.
Chris Smith, club member. I want to ask you to comment about one of the points that was made in today's report discussion, the idea that we're regulating the environment on system boundaries, but we have to apply that to lot boundaries. And we're seeing that in spades here in Portland with the adoption of the regulations around stream buffers, where I think we're doing some very good environmental work, but there are some property owners who are, I think, literally outraged at what it's doing to their lots. Do you have some suggestions about how we can resolve that conflict?
Well, and the conflict is, again, I think you're correct. We try to do, there isn't a stream that normally goes up to the lot line and then says, oops, I can't go there anymore because it's going there and takes a right turn. And birds don't usually recognize those things either, and neither do deer or wildlife. Most importantly, water streams and lands just simply don't. Geography is what should prevail. We probably back at the turn of the century or earlier in the last century, it's not this one. I keep forgetting we just had a turn of the century. We should have really been basing our whole jurisdictional by watersheds rather than the way we do it. But the fact is we don't. And we have to find a way to first of all, I think, get people who have these streams and these sort of things going through there to understand that it enhances their value. If we talk about, for instance, I think most people want to be stewards of their land. I don't think anybody, these folks who are complaining about this, are out there saying, I really want to muck this up. What they really want to do is they want it to be good. They want to protect their stream areas. They want to protect these areas. They see the value to that. They object, I think, first of all, to the government coming in saying, well, we're going to regulate this, as if it's an insult to say, wait a minute, are you saying I don't want to do that? Because I think people do. What they're concerned about also, should be concerned about, what about the next person up the stream? And the next person up the stream, is that water coming down going to be of a quality that is going to help them with their area? We need to help those people meet the standards, and then I think certify them. I'd love to see us be able to say, if you meet these standards, just like we have green building standards, if you really go through this and we can certify that you're doing everything to protect the environment and enhance it, you get a green stamp on the deed. And when you go to sell it, that'll increase the value because you know that land has been protected. But it is not a lot-by-lot situation. You've really got to get watersheds together and get people to understand that they're part of a system that needs to be protected. And that just takes a lot of understanding and a lot of one-by-one. There are no two areas alike. And that's why if you're going to help people understand these things or you're going to look at those regulations, you can't just say these rules apply to you and they're the same thing in everybody, because every stream area, every riparian is a little bit different. And we need to go in and work with people individually on their basis and say, let's see what we can do for you to help you make this place better for everybody else and get a value to it. So it's a long, hard road, but it's one that we need to invest in.
I have some questions from the floor. A question from the floor. Aside from increasing funding, what do you feel is needed for Oregon schools? For example, do you feel increasing accountability via increased numbers of standardized tests is the answer?
I was in the legislature and we put all that through Vera Katz. I don't think I'm qualified to say whether the testing is value. What we really need to do primarily is reduce the ratio of students to teachers. I think the best way to make effective education is to give it as much personal attention to students as possible. And you get to that, you may not even need to have testing. But you cannot, I've taught for, that's what I did before I did all of this. I taught for 20 years. And you cannot, a class of 40 people is not manageable. A class of 18 is difficult. So you really need to work on that end of it. And then the ability to assess children and to help them individually will occur without having to have the standardized tests. Kurt?
Hi, Mike. Let's see. As I think many people here, were impressed with your grasp of these public issues. And in many ways, it's dark. And we all have been through a dark period following 9/11. And I'm wondering, it's now spring. And things
It was yesterday, anyway.
Yeah. And things that were dead and dormant are now coming to life. And I'm wondering, in your work, what kinds of signs of hope that you see that Oregon can come back to its values or rediscover new ones and go in the direction that you're indicating?
Well, I think everybody will walk out of here invigorated and enthused about what I've been saying and go out and do something about it. You're going to go out, first of all, you're going to go read your voters' pamphlet, you're going to get a hold of the candidates, you're going to find out who they are, you're going to start asking them questions that are pointed and get them on mark. But as far as a general sense goes, places and cities constantly reinvent themselves. I think there's ups and downs wherever you are, and what I'm concerned about here is that some values that we've held so strong, and we still have those values, I think certainly they exist in this place, need to be sort of rebooted once in a while. We need to remind ourselves what we have and what we have to lose. And if my presentation sort of had a dark side to it, it was really to try to remind people that you can lose this, that you can't just take it for granted. That indeed, if we're going to have the promise of tomorrow, we have to take a hold of that ourselves. The destiny we have is nobody else's, it's just ours. And so I have a lot of faith in Oregonians. I've watched people over all these years constantly prevail. Right now, it seems there's a lot of assaults, and I think our tax system's out of whack, and that's a serious thing that needs to be fixed, but it is a mechanical thing that can be fixed if we have the courage to do it. And I've always been impressed that Oregonians do have that courage and will prevail. So I'm not gloomy about it. I'm just kind of sad right now that we don't see more action, that we don't see more direct activity going on amongst our political leadership and amongst civic organizations to take a hold of those issues and try to make some answers. Yes?
Corleen Craft, member. This is a follow-on to Kurt's question and your answer. When we talk about Oregonians in action and all the initiatives that have been passed, I'd have to say I think they're doing a better job than we are at getting to the people. If you're going to have if we have the supermajority, how are we going to get the majority out there? Who's sitting there opposite Lars Larson? I mean, what about a Mike Burton show? So, I mean, what are some suggestions?
Hey, give me a microphone, I'll be there. Actually, I only want to correct one thing you're saying. A lot of those things have been passed, a lot of those statewide initiatives on the supermajority, this sort of thing, but Oregonians in action haven't been successful. The only thing, they did pass ballot measure 7, but it's in the courts. And what I'm saying about 2611, that's why I guess I'm being so strident about this, is stop this now, because we don't want to give them those successes or they'll go after other ones. But they have been successful. What they do, and what you need to understand, is they have people full-time and they're paid to do this. That list of ballot measures I had is what's called ballot measure shopping. They'll go out with these ballot measures, they'll test them out, and they'll see which one is most likely to I would say, pull the wool over the public's eyes. Which one of these ballot titles is going to work best? Then they have some heavy funding. And most of that funding, if you find out, comes from back east or other places, or people who have dollars to put into this, and they're paid organizations. I don't know of any other organization around on the opposite side of these issues that has that kind of wealth of that kind of organization. They just don't exist. We don't have a paid group to go out and do progressive things on the ballot. If somebody knows a progressive alternative to Bill Sizemore, I want to meet him. Because there's no one out there getting paid to do that. And so that's part of what we're up against, and I just want to let the public know that. I think we all need to let the public know, who are you dealing with here when you're dealing with these organizations? These are people who are in the business, who make a living out of getting things on the ballot, and they pander to the lowest common denominator they can find by shopping those ballot measures around. And we need to understand it and explain that to people. Read those initiatives, take a look at who's behind them, and figure out what's being said. I'll do it, and give me the radio show, and I'll be there.
Andy Sloop, member. Yeah, actually, I was just going to make a suggestion along those lines. Maybe there should be, although you have the financial problem that you just identified, but if that somehow could be overcome, running ads that basically say, be careful what you sign. Be careful about the initiatives that you sign. And this would be sort of like the lung cancer ads that mirror the Marlboro Man ad. You know, it's something that's countervailing that uses the same tools.
It's a good point. Again, it's a matter of being able to find the dollars to do that. I also want to make sure that you understand, and I want to thank and applaud the City Club, because this is a place where those issues do come up. This is a place where they are debated, and everybody in this room, I know, has contributed their time or their dollars to try to clarify and do things correctly. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about that. So, Patty, you got another one?
You mentioned the fact that we have the lowest consumption tax in the union. Do you think, and Oregonians have turned down a sales tax 9 times now, do you think that collectively we have the courage to introduce a new tax on goods and services?
Well, I've been there and done that. Some other people have. See, the Senator Ceases down there, we've all been in the halls at the same time. Well, let me ask you this. If we were to propose a constitutionally limited, say 3% sales tax on, and I'm talking here about with all those broad exemptions for medical and food and those sort of things, how many of you would vote for that? Put your hand up in there. Well, this is probably not a typical crowd. But if it was, I'd have that thing out right now. That most of the hands went up. I think if I asked, let me ask you it a different way. If we were to suggest, and right now the tax rate in Oregon is 5% to 9.3. You go from 5 to 9. That's the brackets on the Oregon tax, all right? And that's the highest in the country. Nobody else comes. Actually, California, I think the rate goes to 9.3, but the low end is 1%. So there's a whole lot of steps in it. But Oregon's got 5 to 9. If we were to propose a 3% sales tax, 1% of that offsetting the percentage on the rate of income, and we'd have to take a look at what those numbers are, that would reduce the income tax rate down to a maximum of 7, but increase the consumption tax to say 4%. Would you vote for that? Yeah, because I'll tell you what, that's the sort of thing that makes sense. That kind of discussion needs to start taking place, but it has been difficult. Oregon, and of course there's a lot of things that we say about our sales tax. You know, gee, we don't have a sales tax. So, I mean, I was at a conference the other day and with some city officials, some folks, 400 people from all over the world, actually. And the first thing that one of the city commissioners got up, and it's the right thing to do, is while you're here, make certain, please, that you take advantage of the no sales tax that we have, because you're going to pay 7-8% less than wherever you come from for these goods to take home to sell. So we have to, again, sell the stuff. That's great. But we're also missing, by the way, the revenues that those 400 so-odd people would have left here behind us, and we could have used that. Mr. Smith.
Joe Smith, City Club member. In response to your last question, which didn't get the same overwhelming majority, people raising their hands.
It was too complex.
And I'm not expecting a lot of people to raise hands when they want to analyze something, but I'm troubled with the idea that we would change it by taking it off the top. How about your same proposal, but instead of dropping 9 to 7, dropping 5 to 3?
I'd be all for that. I'll tell you what I want to achieve out of this. Not revenue neutrality, but tax equity. We need to get more money, and we need tax equity. So any measure you want to do, bring it up or down.
I'm Tom Dunn, City Club member, and I'm just a little concerned. I think there was a real misunderstanding. When you're taking straw votes, you are on the radio. And my own gut feeling is that there would be absolutely no difference in the amount of hands that went up on your second proposal, and I'd like to re-vote on that.
All right. Tom, I appreciate it. That's right. And folks on the radio can't see the hands, but on the first proposal, practically every hand in the room went up. Let's take a second vote on the second one, we'll use Joe's proposal here, and if everybody understood that. And would you vote for what we were proposing there? Tax equity, 3 to 5. And I'm seeing hands go up all over again. Good. Thank you very much. That's democracy, let me tell you.
Well, on that very positive note, today's meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, Mike Burton, for a 10th, but I hope not your last presentation.